Greetings and salutations, young true believers. So, today we're going to talk about ethical subjectivism and another closely related theory, emotivism. So, ethical subjectivism, or sometimes it's simple subjectivism, is the view that if I, the speaker or the writer, approve of an action, right? I say X is morally acceptable, or X is right, X is good, X ought to be done. All that means is that I, whoever the speaker or the writer, approve of X. And similarly, if I say I disapprove of X, X shouldn't be done, etc., what I'm saying is that I, the speaker or the writer, do not approve of X, right? So on the one hand, this might seem like a pretty straightforward theory, right? Okay, you your ethics are based on what you think about the situation, what you feel about the situation, and never the twain shall meet, right? There's no fact of the matter about morality, so it's up to the individual. It has a certain appeal. It's simple, right? But it's also horrendously mistaken. Why is it mistaken? Well, the first problem with ethical subjectivism is that it implies that we are infallible, right? You, as the moral authority, are always right. You can't possibly be wrong because there's no objective standard by which we could compare or assess your judgment. So you could never be in the wrong. And yet, as we obviously know, people go wrong all the time. So none of us are infallible in our judgments. The second manifestation of subjectivism in ethics is what's known as emotivism. Now, this is where let's state this. Whereas I generally have a very high opinion of the text we're using, the Rachel's and Rachel's text in this class, Rachel's and Rachel's make the same mistake that a lot of interpreters of David Hume do, that a lot of the interpreters of Hume make, and they assume that he's an emotivist in the sense of A.J. Ayer or C.L. Stevenson. So let's talk about Ayer and Stevenson first. So Ayer is of the opinion that when you say, for example, I approve of giving money to charity, or I disapprove of war, right? What you're saying in the former case is charity, yay. And what you're saying in the latter case is war, boo, right? And there's nothing more to moral statements than that. Moral statements are not statements of fact. There's no fact of the matter that corresponds to them. Ergo, they're empty. And ditto that with Stevenson, right? He doesn't think there's any fact of the matter out in the universe that could correspond to a moral utterance. And so moral utterances are, for all intents and purposes, just expressions of one's particular emotional state, right, or one's desires, and they're nothing more. This is not Hume's view. This is not Hume's view. That's a view known as crude emotivism, or it's defenders, and you won't find many these days because it's frankly a terrible moral theory, right? They'll just refer to it as emotivism. It's deeply mistaken, and it's certainly not what Hume was arguing. Hume points out that if we examine the facts of the matter of any morally charged case, right? Let's say we're investigating a murder. We'll take stock of the crime scene. We'll note details about it, right? We'll inventory the facts of the matter, right? But he wants to know, at what point does morality enter into the equation? And this is Hume's genius. This is his innovation in ethics, and it's still to this day an underappreciated innovation in ethical theory. You're never going to get morality until you direct your thoughts inward and you have a an emotional response. Until you have an emotional response to the facts of the case, you feel revulsion, right? Or to take a less serious example, you see someone helping an elderly person with their groceries up the stairs to their second story apartment, right? And you feel an emotion of approval, right? Hume's point is there can be no morality unless there's an accompanying moral, an accompanying emotional state, right? And morality then is intimately linked with uh, empathy, right? Our ability to temporarily suspend our own emotional state and thereby experience someone else's emotional state as if it were our own, right? And the emotions. So, as Rachel's put it, uh, there are, as they see it, the emotivists have painted what's known as a false dilemma, right? A false dilemma fallacy. It's a fallacy, the mistaken reasoning that occurs when we assume that there are only two solutions to a problem, right? So those two solutions are one, there are moral facts in the same way that there are planets and spoons and tables and chairs, etc. Or two, our values are nothing more than an expression of our subjective feelings. Well, again, this is a false dilemma because there is three. And the third possibility is that moral truths are truths of reason. That is, that moral judgment is true if it is backed by better reasons than the alternatives. That's true. That's doubtless true. But as Hume points out, it's not the end of the story because, yes, moral truths are, if they're backed by reason, they are better reasons for accepting a moral claim than others. But you can't have a moral truth without a corresponding emotional state, right? It just does not follow. So we we need to take into account, right, our emotions because we know full well, right, that without our ability to experience our neighbors or our friends or total strangers emotional state via empathy, we can't be ethical, right? If we don't have a capacity for empathy, we suffer from antisocial personality disorder and we're sociopaths. Now, a sociopath can be law abiding, right? But they cannot be moral. They cannot be moral. So, whereas again, this Hume's theory is often caricatured as being a precursor to A.J. Ayer and C.L. Stevenson. Hume's view is much more sophisticated than either of those views, and it needs to be taken very seriously. And you can see the ways in which Hume's theory deeply influenced a group we'll talk about in a few weeks to come, the feminist care ethicists, with their emphasis on personal feeling as and um, emotional bonds as morally praiseworthy considerations.